Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our National Fossil Day Let's Tour live stream. We are on our next stop on our virtual tour of museums across the U.S. As we've been saying, we are asking the question, why are museum collections so important? For a lot of us, we only think about the displays that the public gets to see, like in our backgrounds right now. But really, those are just small portions of museum collections. And to really get an appreciation for museum collection, you have to go behind the exhibits. And that's what we're doing. We're visiting museums across the US to visit their collections and learn about all the really cool stuff they have back there. Just as a reminder, because we are in the midst of a global pandemic, all of our participants in our Let's Tour live stream today have taken all the necessary precautions and safety measures to ensure that we are preventing the spread of COVID. So let's get started on this next stop. I'd like to welcome a very, very special paleontologist, a hero of mine, Dr. Lisa White from UC Berkeley. Hello, Lisa.
Hi, it's so
Hey,
great to be
Lisa.
with you. Happy National Fossil Day.
Happy National Fossil Day. Oh, you know what? I just realized I forgot to introduce ourselves.
Bye.
It's fine.
It's
It's
the
fine.
afternoon, people. We're,
I know.
we're going.
So, my name is Gabriel Santos. I am from the Alf Museum. Brittany.
I'm Brittany Stoneberg, and I'm from the Western Science Center, and our two museums are partnering together today to bring you this whole live stream.
Okay. So, yes, as you can tell, we are what? This is our sixth live stream today. So we are
Yes,
going
we're
strong, and
good.
again, we have energy because we are excited to be visiting the one and only UC Museum of Paleontology up at UC Berkeley. Lisa, how are things going there for you?
It's going well, considering everything, we're just plugging along. We have so many projects right now that involve, curating, cataloging our collection. I'm partnering with other museums to do virtual field experiences from some of the places that are classic locales for our fossils. And so that's partly what I'm going to highlight today, are opportunities to learn from the places where these collections are made and why it's so important to have that understanding of deep time history.
Awesome. Well, as the running theme has been going in our live streams today, Wi-Fi is not so great in the Berkeley collections, so we have a pre-recorded tour with Lisa. And make sure you
Mhm.
stick around because after the tour, we're going to do a Q&A with Lisa. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll ask them then. And now, here we go on our next virtual tour.
I'm Lisa White, the Director of Education at the University of California Museum of Paleontology. And we have you here at the Museum of Paleontology because I wanted to better illustrate some of the fossil zones in the virtual experience called Explore Fossils. So what I'm going to do is just highlight some of the namesake fossils from each of the zones. The Etchigoing Formation is one of the units in the Kettleman Hills that's very rich in fossils. And one of the first zones that is introduced in the virtual field experience is called the Patino Pectin Zone. And Patino Pectin are a kind of scallop. So here's a shell, it's a bivalve, and it has a distinctive shell with these ridges that is easy to recognize. Sometimes when we find the shells, they might be broken, as you can see with these, but there's enough of the features that are distinguishable that we know when we're in this zone. And in general, zones are named for characteristic fossils, and they're named for a fossil that might be common just in that zone. But there are other kinds of fossils that you usually find associated with the zone. And so some of these might include, this is a mussel shell. So Mytilus is the name of the genus. It's a kind of California mussel from 5 million years ago. and sometimes we find them even larger in size. So at any one time in the geological past, you had mussels as large as this or as small as this size. So these are just some of the things that we find in the Patino Pectin Zone. There are also barnacles, so they have really characteristic shells. Oftentimes they will cement onto other shells. In fact, we have an example here of barnacles that have attached to a larger Patinopectin shell. So that's an example of bioerosion, or when shells encrust or attach or cement to another shell. So these are just some examples from one of the oldest of the fossil zones in the Ucmp Formation in the Kettleman Hills. And next we're going to look at another zone that's a little bit younger in time, from the Patinopectin Zone. And the next zone is named for a clam called Macoma. So with this particular fossil, oftentimes the shells are somewhat thin, and they're broken up or fragmented a little bit. There are times when we find the fossil and we might just have a partial shell, and we're able to see some of the interior of the fossil in a cast, but we can still recognize this particular clam named Macoma is the genus name because of its shape and other characteristics, and so that's very typical for that namesake fossil Macoma. We find other clams associated with the zone, and so this is one that's thicker in its shell dimensions, and it looks quite a bit different from the Macoma fossil, but when we find it, we know that it's associated with this zone. There continue to be barnacles in this zone as well, and they occur in these kinds of clusters, and so we are always, excited when we find these as well. So these are fossils that are characteristic of the Macoma zone. The next zone in the Ucmp Formation that's highlighted in the virtual field experience is named after a gastropod called it's called Cyphanalia, and so that's the genus name for this particular variety of snails. So gastropod is a snail, so it has a shell that has whorls, so it's a spiral, and this isn't the best preserved Cyphenalia, and that's somewhat typical. Is oftentimes when we find it, we may not have the whole shell preserved, but we know what it is from the overall characteristic shape. And in this case, we have a partial cast, but we can still see from the overall dimensions and characteristics of the shell that it's the same genus. So that's Cyphenalia, and sometimes we find smaller ones in size, but again, from the characteristic shape and aspects of this gastropod, we know that it's Cyphenalia. There are other gastropods that you can find in this zone, and this one's a beauty. The name of this genus is Foraria, and it has these very interesting spikes that are very characteristic of the shell, as it has these various whorls, so it also has a spiral dimension, but unlike Cyphenalia, it has more ornamentation. So we're always excited when we find those associated with the zone. Other common fossils, the mussel that we also find associated with other fossil zones in the Kettleman Hills, we also find in the Cyphanalia Zone. As we saw in other zones, there can be barnacles that encrust or attach to shells of other fossils. So in this case, in the Cyphanalia Zone, we see examples of barnacles that have attached to this mussel shell from the genus Mytilus. Next in the Etchigoing Formation is the Pseudocardium Zone. And pseudocardium, which roughly translates in Latin to sort of like a heart. If you look at it from a side view, you can see that the nature of the shape of the valves looks like it looks sort of heart-shaped. And even though the shell can be somewhat eroded and fragmented, it's pretty well distinguished by the thick nature of the shells. We have some more examples here where we might just have one valve, but you get a sense for how thick it is compared to other bivalve or clam fossils. And in the interior of the shell, there's some distinctive impressions that are made from the muscles that used to be present when the animal was alive. So those are muscle scars. And then you can see another look at this heart shape from the side view. So that's pseudocardium, and when we get to that zone in the Etchigoing Formation in the Kettleman Hills, we usually do find large numbers of those shells in that zone. There can be other fossils too. One of the common fossils in the Etchigoing Formation, actually in all the zones, are sand dollars. And so there are some examples here of sand dollars that we find in this zone. There can be other kinds of clams as well, ones that might be larger in size and even more robust. Others might be smaller in size. This is a particular genus that's characterized by a very equidimensional shell, where it's kind of just the same shape and same height and same width. So we see quite a few of those, and in the interior of these shells it has a very distinctive pattern along the hinge, and so that helps us define this particular clam, which is called Glycymeris, and it also has distinctive muscle scars there. And our goal, again, in introducing you to the fossil zones of the Kettleman Hills is to show you not only the fossil for which the zone is named, but also in showing you here in our collections some other kinds of fossils that are associated with those horizons in the Kettleman Hills. In addition to the Etchigoing Formation in the Kettleman Hills, there are also two other formations that we've studied in the area. And the next formation that we'll talk about that's younger than the Etchigoing Formation is called the San Joaquin Formation. And one of the zones that we distinguish in the San Joaquin Formation is called the Pectin Zone. And pectins are a kind of bivalve or scallop that has a very distinctive shell with these folds or ridges. Sometimes the shells are very curved like this one. Other times they may be more flat, but it's a very recognizable shell, and they can be very, very common in this zone. And so we always know when we're in the Pectin Zone by the presence of this genus of clam called pectins. There are other kinds of fossils that are associated with the Pectin Zone. I find it one of the most fascinating zones in the Kettleman Hills. You even find corals. So this is a variety of corals that lived in the sea all those millions of years ago. And so we find this particular variety of organism there as well. And so in addition to the corals and the pectin or scallop shells, we often find vertebrate remains as well. And so we're in the process of identifying these vertebrate bones, and it's very exciting when we find these as well. There are also other kinds of invertebrates. There are oyster shells that have a distinctive characteristic as well, and so sometimes we find these associated with the scallops and the corals and with some of the vertebrates that we find from this area. Above the Pectin Zone, but still in the San Joaquin Formation, is a zone named for a very small bivalve called Acela. And so the Acela Zone is named for this tiny, it's only a few centimeters in width, is a clam called Acela. And so when we find it, it's often associated with oysters. So this is a whole tray of oyster shells, and oysters have kind of an irregular shape to the shell, and you can frequently see lots of growth lines, but kind of an irregularity to the shell shape. And so these are associated with the Acela Zone. We also find sand dollars as well. They are smaller in size than some of the other sand dollars from the Etchigoing Formation, but they're easily recognizable as well. The youngest formation that we've studied in the Kettleman Hills is called the Tulare Formation, and the zone that we've described is called the Amnicola Zone, and it's named for a very small species of gastropod that you can barely see with the unaided eye. But when we find it in the Amnicola Zone, it's usually in these sandy units where it's just chocked full of the shell of that gastropod, of that snail, Amnicola, and it'll have other things as well, other fossils within the sand, including small bivalves, along with the gastropods. And sometimes we also find larger bivalves, so not everything associated with that zone, the Amnicola Zone, is that small, but there is this particular variety of bivalve that is also found associated with some of the units there, and then others that are more robust. So it's a very interesting zone that occurs just at in the youngest part of this geological area. And in addition to those small snails and these larger bivalves, you also find horizons with rock exposed where there's no shells left in the rock at all, no shelly material, but what we see are molds. So all these little circular U-shaped lines that you see in this particular rock, which is a limestone, reflect remnants of shell fossils that were here at one time. So when we examine fossils associated with a zone, we're typically looking at a variety of fossils that are found together. So when this area existed millions of years ago and there was a living community of organisms, there would have been a variety of animals that were all living together. And so as they fossilized, sometimes we find the remains of these organisms in the form of the whole shell, but other times when we find them, it may just be molds and casts or impressions. So no matter the state of preservation of the fossil, it's still very valuable to a paleontologist who's examining fossils in these zones to be able to find such an array of fossils.
And we're back.
Thank you so much, Lisa.
You're welcome.
That was a really cool tour. Lots of really awesome fossils there.
Okay, yeah, I was sharing with my hosts earlier that that collection is one part of that collection came from San Francisco State University to the UCMP. So I was a faculty member at San Francisco State for years and oversaw a collection of Kettleman Hills fossils. So it was great to get it cataloged with the UCMP and use it as a teaching and learning opportunity because we have virtual field experiences that center around those areas. So those video clips are part of the virtual field experience.
That's awesome that you're offering virtual field experiences. Like, are those part of how you're dealing with COVID and lockdown, or how's it really affected you at the museum?
Okay, well, we were ahead of the game as far as having some virtual resources because these were planned as part of a larger collections rehouse and curation grant. But we're managing and maintaining. It's been a challenge though because a number of the projects I lead do involve actual field work, and so missing opportunities, of course, this summer and fall to be out with students, programs that get students out on ships as part of science learning experiences. So miss a little bit of that, but we're keeping busy with all our collections projects and with some of the broader impacts materials that I oversee. So we're hanging in there.
That's good to hear.
Just like all of us.
Right.
Alrighty, so there's some questions in the chat, and one of them is, Lisa, as a person of color and a woman in paleontology, like what has been your experience as part of the scientific community? Have you faced, difficulties or discrimination as a result of that?
I have honestly, and a lot of that experience, some of that experience is what's driven me to create and direct programs that serve diverse audiences and really try to encourage students of color to consider geosciences and the paleontological sciences as a career path. And when I was running field programs for high school students, we would go to some of the classic, national parks of the West. And we were in a small town in Utah one year, and we joked that with however many people of color there were on this trip, we said, "Oh, we just added that number to this town." Maybe there was only 5 Black people before, but now there's how many of us? 20. So we just integrated the town. So I often just look for ways to, be more inclusive in what I do because I don't want students or an early career professional to have to, experience some of the things I did. But, I always just kept it moving and, I love our discipline and certainly determined to be a part of it no matter what.
That's amazing and so important. And really, for like people in my generation who are people of color or from any underrepresented group, we really appreciate like the work that you do, Lisa, for all that. And speaking of which, can you tell us what your shirt says?
Oh, yeah. So there was a great fundraiser this summer. So this is Dino Nerds for Black Lives, and a number of young scientists, paleontology nerds, had an all-day fest. They wanted to bring attention to Black lives, to social justice, to the need for empowerment, especially through science. And so I was fortunate to be able to chat with the group, be part of the whole Share Fest this summer, and support their organization. Mm-hmm.
So awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. And a few more questions. So, how old generally, and I know this could probably have a broad range, but how old generally are the fossils in the UCMP collection, and especially the ones that you showed us?
Okay, well, the ones that I showed from the Kettleman Hills, which are in the Central Valley of California, are on the younger side. So, again, younger to a geologist is 5 million years old. So, they're between 3 and 5 million years old. But the oldest part of our collection, we have fossils from the Precambrian. We have fossils that are billions of years old. So, in our 5 million piece, collection, it really does span all the geological eras. So from the Cenozoic to way back the Paleozoic Precambrian. So most paleontologists specialize in a certain period of time, a certain geological epoch. So for me, it tends to be the later Cenozoic. So yes, those fossils from Kettleman Hills were between 3 and 5 million years old.
Awesome. I think we have time for the one last question.
Yep.
Okay.
One last question. So UCMP is on a college campus.
Yes.
So this person was curious about who has access to the research resources offered by the museum. Would an archaeology student at Berkeley be able to study specimens in the museum? Like, how does that work?
How does that work? So we are primarily a research museum. We have some public space, and in my education outreach director, I invest a lot of time and energy in our online resources as part of our, broader impacts, goals and objectives. But for researchers and even for students that may have a reason to access our collection, perhaps they're studying a certain fossil or a regional area that might require them to want to access the collection. So special permission can be gained. We have a system for allowing access, and we even for students at Berkeley, when we are actually on campus again, sometimes we do have open houses or programs and opportunities for students to view the collections. And there are opportunities as well for students to volunteer or to get paid as student assistants on some of our projects. And when we're finally able to be back on campus again, we do like to make opportunities available to students really of any major to be able to work with us in the collection. So there are those opportunities.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lisa.
Yes, Lisa, this is great. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. So happy National Fossil Day. Glad to be part of this telethon, marathon.
Yeah. If people want more information or want to learn more about you or the museum, how can they do that?
Great. Well, they can go to our main website, which is ucmp.berkeley.edu, and there are links to the program that was highlighted in the video that was shown, the project that looks at invertebrate fossils from the Cenozoic, and many, many other resources one can find on our homepage. So Understanding Science, Understanding Evolution, two of our most popular websites, have new resources attached to them. And we just launched a new web resource, Understanding Global Change. But yes, starting at ucmp.berkeley.edu is a great place to know more about our collection.
Great. Thank you. All right, everybody. So thank you again, Dr. Lisa White, for that amazing tour through the UCMP collections. That does it for this stop. And next, we're going to be heading to NHMLA Invertebrate Collection. So that's going to be at 3 o'clock. So just wait about 30 minutes for that. If you would like to support this program or any of the other programs that our museums, the Raymond and Alf Museum and the Western Science Center do, there will be links to do that in the description. If you'd like to learn more about National Fossil Day, you can do that at the National Park Service, nps.gov. And also don't forget to like and subscribe our channel, as we'll have more videos coming out today and more Fossil Friday chats in the future. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Bye. Thank you. See you later.